Before you get listening to this episode, I just wanted to let you know that it discusses self-harm extensively. If you are having suicidal thoughts, please reach out to the National Suicide Hotline at 988. The Trevor Project also has a helpful number for those in the LGBTQ community who may be experiencing a crisis. That number is 1-866-488-7386. I also wanted to give an update about last week's episode in regards to Mountain Youth Academy. Earlier this week, I sent out a child abuse report to DCS. I have my own ethical beliefs that I'm required to do so, and on top of that, everyone in Tennessee is a mandated reporter when it comes to child abuse. That means any person with reasonable cause that child abuse is taking place must either contact law enforcement or DCS. I reached DCS through Tennessee Child Abuse Hotline at 877-237-0004. The first step of that reporting process is once you give them all the information, DCS decides if they are going to investigate or not. In this particular situation, DCS decided not to investigate Mountain Youth Academy. Welcome back to the Ex-Foster Voice, where we represent the voices of those who have lived through the foster system. I'm Serena Vasudeva, ex-foster youth and your host. Today we'll be hearing from Adrienna Irick, who has lived in 4 different facilities, all owned by the non-profit Youth Villages. We met at Wallace Group Home in 2020 and dated for a bit. Before we dive into your experience in how foster care was shaped by your queer identity, let's talk a little bit about what your experience in care looked like.
I was placed into foster care at 7 and then at 14.
At what point did you sort of transition into the care of youth villages? When did you find out that you were sort of in the care of youth villages?
When I went to Inner Harbour.
So Inner Harbour is a residential treatment facility. For our listeners who might not know, how would you describe what a residential is?
So residential in my eyes is basically the standpoint of growing into adulthood, but it's not very therapeutic.
So RTCs, residentials, they're meant to provide therapy, but you don't think that they're very therapeutic at all?
Yes.
Because they're sort of like they're long-term mental hospitals. That's kind of how I've always described it.
Right.
Where, you stay there, you get therapy, you get, med pass, things like that. They're supposed to provide an education for you there, things like that. It's basically like a mental hospital, except you stay there for a little longer.
Yeah.
What did Inner Harbour look like on the outside?
So Inner Harbour is based off of like a big ass ranch. It's definitely more open than enclosed. There's a courtyard that's like off the whole campus. That's just off by itself on like the end of the road. So I was on like the courtyard that wasn't attached to the youth villages area, but was still part of youth villages.
What was sort of the first thing that happened when you walked in those doors? What were you feeling? What were you experiencing?
I experienced a lot of flashbacks, but then I was also really shaky.
Was there a reason you felt so anxious?
When I walked in, there was a fight, so I wasn't checked in completely. I was just thrown on the yard, and they just left and took care of what they needed to take care of.
So for our listeners who don't know, what is the yard?
Pretty much where you sat when you first woke up. So basically the big living room, but in therapeutic terms, it's day room. I was on Courtyard 3, and I entered 2018.
All right. So a courtyard is basically, from my understanding, it's like a section of like a certain amount of kids, and it's basically like a little room, right? And that's like, okay, this is your group that you're with.
Yes.
Yeah, so you have courtyard 1, and that would be 20 or 30, and then courtyard 2, 20 or 30, and you'd sleep with them and eat with them and everything like that.
Yes.
Okay. So what kind of mental health services did they offer you, and did you feel they were adequate?
The kind of therapeutic skills that they offered were adequate at a certain standpoint, but then after a while, it just kind of got agitating because, hey, on the first day, you want me to sit down next to you at your desk and
well, how have you been doing? I say I'm fine, whatever, and you come back and say, no, you're not. You know I'm not fine because I'm here, but you don't ask why I'm not fine. And that's where the whole safety issue comes in, is you're here to help me, not here to make me worse.
Well, that's awful. That seems really counterintuitive. That seems like it would sort of hurt your relationship with your therapist. Would you agree?
Yes.
How many times a week did you meet with your therapist? And did you have group therapy?
It was group therapy once a week, and then you see your therapist twice a week.
Okay. So what did group therapy look like? Did you find that approach helpful at all compared to regular therapy, or?
Group therapy didn't help really, because when you're all sitting down and somebody's like the head of the circle talking, nobody wants to listen to that person, and then it just gets all rowdy and out of control, and then you get yelled at to sit down and stuff like that. So it's like, although you're behaving and somebody else is misbehaving during the group, you're still going to get yelled at, and that's not fair because I'm not completing my treatment when I'm doing what you're asking me to do.
What do you think specifically Inner Harbor could do to sort of improve the mental health resources that it gives?
As far as like therapy wise, if you're a therapist, like, and you see that somebody's emotional, don't sit there and like harass them to talk about it. If they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to talk about it. Don't jump down their throat. Like, that's what I felt like all the staff were trying to do, is jump down our throats. You can't force it out of us.
And tell me, if you felt, uncomfortable with your therapist or you felt like it wasn't working, what could you do?
Nothing. You were stuck with what you got. DCS can place you in there for a certain reason, but they're just going to help you with what DCS thinks that you need help with, not with what you as a person needs help with. And that's the issue.
So you think Inner Harbor should listen more to what the kids are actually saying that they need help with?
Yes. The person, not the person on the outside that brought you in here. Like, you as an individual, you're in there for therapy. You need to speak about what you need, not what they think you need.
So when you expressed that you felt like self-harming, how would your therapist and how would your staff react?
They just kind of yell at you saying, don't do it, don't do this, don't do that, you're going to get in trouble, this and that. Like, that really doesn't solve the issue. If I was a therapist and I seen somebody else react in the way that I was reacting as a kid, I would ask them what's wrong, not don't do it, you're going to get grounded for doing this, or you're going to be placed in seclusion for self-harming, this and that. Like, that's not really helping me. Locking me up in a room isn't going to stop me from doing what I want to do. I feel like it's all about communication, and that's one thing that Inner Harbor sucked at, was communication.
So you mentioned being placed in seclusion. What is that?
It's basically just a padded room with a door and then obviously a camera so they can see you. And then they basically just shut the door and the door locks behind them. So in order for you to get out of the room, they have to get you out.
What was the longest you were ever secluded?
I'd say an hour.
Did you ever hear of anyone else who were secluded longer than an hour?
Not that I'm aware of.
Do you think that that sort of added to everything you were already dealing with?
Yes, because when you pretty much barricade me in a room with no one to talk to, nobody to see, you're basically trapping me in my own head, because that's like the only other person to talk to. I don't know about your head, but everybody's got a dangerous side to their head. And when you're locked in a room by yourself, and the only thing that's monitoring you is a camera, and nobody's talking to you, nobody's listening to you while you're crying, none of that. Yeah, it brings back a lot that you don't want to experience.
How many times were you secluded while you were at Inner Harbor?
I was secluded 3 times.
And how long were you at Inner Harbor?
3 months? 3 to 4 months?
Once a month.
Yeah.
Wow. So after, did they bring you to the therapist, or did they just kind of throw you back in the cottage and say, there you go?
Threw me back with the kids. Basically, the way that they did the seclusion room still is the same way that they did restraints. Once they got done restraining you and you seen the nurse, whatever, they just throw you back into the group and say, don't do it again. That's basically how the seclusion room is. They just throw you in the room, wait a couple minutes, make sure you're calmed down, and then they throw you back in the group. That's not very therapeutic in my eyes. What's being locked and closed in a room gonna solve? It might calm you down, but at the end of the day, it's really hyping up your adrenaline more because there's nobody around you.
So you've sort of touched on this. What exactly is a restraint?
Basically, a restraint, in their words, is a therapeutic hold to stop your aggression or to stop you from charging or anything that you do that regards them to placing their hands on you.
So, in the most basic terminology, a restraint reduces a person's ability to move. They're usually used when someone might hurt themselves or someone else, but they do pose the risk of causing physical or mental trauma. How many times were you restrained at Inner Harbour?
Quite a few, but 3 at the most.
Do you feel like these restraints were done properly just to prevent you from hurting yourself, or do you think that they became windows into physical abuse?
As a self-harmer past, when you do a restraint on me, it's gonna make me more angry because all I want to do is cause pain to myself, but yet you're gonna cause pain to me. That really solved what? Like, just because I self-harm, it's painful, doesn't mean you gotta put me through pain too. And that's where the staff didn't really care about the youth's opinions. But there is a lot of threats that do come with any type of physical contact between a staff and a youth. There has to be a reason why you're laying your hands on them. And half the time, there's not a reason. It's just because I can, because you was doing something that told me I needed to.
How does it actually feel to be restrained?
Painful, like extremely painful. It's like they're breaking your shoulders off of your neck.
If you had to sort of tell me what it looked like how many staff were involved, like how were they actually putting you in the restraint?
Basically, the staff's hip goes in the kid's stomach. It's like you're tied in a knot. The minimum staff is 2, but it depends on like the 2 staff aren't strong enough so they can't grab that one peer. Then I think the maximum of staff in one restraint can be 6, and just one kid and 6 staff holding on to you. That's just, trust me, it's painful. You don't want all that pressure on you.
Did you ever witness anybody go through that, or did you go through that where there was 6 staff?
I went through it, but there was a lot of other patients that also went through it.
Do you have a particular example where the details really stick with you?
So one of the main restraints that I've been in that has had more than 2 staffs would have been the laying on the ground restraint that they do. I thought that was called seclusion, but I think there's another word to that restraint, because I know they're seated, there's team control, but it's the laying on the floor restraint where they hold your legs, your stomach down, your arms down, your head down. Yeah, the restraint where they touch all on you. And I've been tied down in multiple of those. I had a staff member that pushed me at G-cert, and I pushed her back, and she threw me on the ground, and she put me into a restraint, and she was wearing a jean jacket, and she took her jean jacket and made a rug mark right here, and it was a big scar for a couple of months.
Did they ever do anything about that? Did you report it? What went on after that?
Nothing was done about it. If you didn't touch me, I wouldn't have touched you. That's what I was told. Communication within the whole wide world of youth villages sucks.
Clearly. Was there ever any time that you saw things like arm twisting, hitting, punching, kicking, anything that a staff definitely shouldn't be doing to a kid?
Oh, tons of it.
What specifically?
Arm twisting, a lot of kicking, throwing down, punching. Yeah.
Was any of this ever reported? Was there a way to report it? Do you feel like that way was adequate?
Well, when it came to like any situation, there was a youth village's slip that was named a grievance form that you can fill out that would help report things. But the grievance paper didn't help report things because the papers that were pulled out of the box, they were looked over, not important, in the trash. So that's where the whole communication really sucks. I filled out a bunch of grievances and not a single one of them were looked over.
Do you ever know of a situation where anybody in your cottage filed a grievance and it was actually answered in some way?
Yes, I do. It just basically had to do with the food in the cafeteria. The mystery meat joke got around, and well, it was placed on the grievance that there was mystery meat. And so I guess one of the lunchroom people were like, they said something disrespectful and said it's not mystery meat, but eat it anyways, or something like that. And the kid took it offensive. But that's the only grievance report that I've ever seen that was actually pulled out and talked about with no issues.
So, what kind of grievances did you fill out for? Like, did you fill out one for physical abuse, anything? What sort of subjects were your grievances about?
Basically, like the cottage restrictions, like don't move unless I tell you. And one of my main grievances were placed on the telephone. Nobody should be listening to my supervised call that is only supposed to be supervised by the staff, not kids too.
So, tell me a bit about how phone calls worked in Inner Harbor.
It was phone calls had to be on speakerphone, and they were 7 minutes each. And you could only talk to the person that was approved on your contact list through DCS.
Yeah, and that's something that I had an issue with too. I had an approved contact with my friend. It had to be supervised by the staff, but because it was on speakerphone and everyone on the hall had their doors open, well, then everybody's going to hear the phone call and they're all joking that I have a boyfriend when I'm just friends with this guy. And it did get really annoying. And even the staff played in and said, haha, you have a boyfriend. You're not supposed to be, joking about that stuff, especially if I'm telling you, hey, quit it.
Right.
So from Inner Harbor, you went to Dogwood. What year was this?
I know I was at Dogwood for a year and 4 months, but I'm not sure when exactly I was placed.
Here's how Youth Villages, the nonprofit that runs Dogwood, talks about it on their website. Located on 41 secluded acres on the outskirts of Memphis, this beautiful campus provides a peaceful atmosphere to help boys and girls with a variety of emotional and behavioral problems. The Dogwood campus's tranquil setting is home to individual cottages that group youth by gender, age, diagnosis, and functioning level. The 10 to 12 members of each group live in the same cottage and spend all day together, attending class, eating meals, and participating in activities as a group. The campus features a specialized treatment program to address problem sexual behaviors, but is also equipped to serve boys ages 8 to 17 and girls ages 11 to 17 who have been impacted by trauma.
I don't fully agree with the statement. Now, they do provide PSP therapy and other functioning therapies as far as like dealing with trauma. I do remember doing a trauma narrative there, writing it out, typing it out. And when I burned my trauma narrative, I put it in an origami box and I planted it underneath one of the dogwood trees. My therapy, as far as dogwood went, was okay, but the lack of communication is still there.
What is a trauma narrative?
Where you write out everything that you've been through in your childhood that you feel like you can't talk about.
Do you think that writing that helped?
If you think writing it out is going to make it disappear, it's not going to. And I think that's where a lot of people get mixed up, because that's what I thought. I figured, okay, if I write it out, it'd never be there. but it's all in how you decide to release it.
How often did you go to group therapy and individual therapy?
Therapy was once a week. Group therapy was twice a week.
What were the mental health resources like at Dogwood? Do you think it was good or?
There's not enough staff to accommodate the youth's needs. There's too many kids for a minimum of 6 staff in each area. That's just not enough supervision. I know as a youth that was located in youth villages that just recently aged out a year ago, I didn't get all the needs that I needed because there was another youth before me that needed more help than I did. And that's understandable, but that's where I'm saying a lot of jealousy comes from the staff is they pick and choose who they want to work with, but they're not there for them. They're there for everybody.
What was the staff to youth ratio at Dogwood?
I think it was like 2 per 4 kids or something like that.
Okay. The education system at Dogwood, obviously you're not allowed to go to public school, they have a private school, right?
Correct.
How did that work? Do you think that the education there was adequate?
No, I don't. Say there's 3 people in one classroom. One was in 9th, 10th, and 11th. You'd all do the same grade work. It wasn't your own grade work. So, no. The education in youth villages is terrible. It's trash. They need to fix it. I entered youth villages in 7th grade. I'm currently in the GED program, and the way that youth villages school is basically like what you learn in kindergarten or first grade. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Those are the top 4 things that youth villages focus on.
What would you learn in English? What would you learn in history?
History was pretty much history class, I can say. English was kind of iffy. Say, adverbs was the first week of the month. Adverbs would also be the last week of the month. They repeatedly taught the same thing. You didn't learn what you were supposed to. You were just retaught what they thought you didn't know.
What do you think youth villages needs to do, or do you have any suggestions on what they could do to improve the education system at places like Dogwood?
Youth villages in general need real teachers and real principals. If you look at it, public school is you're supposed to achieve more year by year. Youth villages, yes, it's year by year, but the year you enter is the year your school stops. Because I know a lot of people that are in my situation where they never got the chance to graduate because the year that they entered is the year your school was stuck at. You didn't proceed in any way that you were meant to.
Did you take the ACT?
Yes, I did.
So the ACT is so critical to get into college. Not only it can get you a scholarship, and it can even determine whether or not you get into a university or college. If you don't have a high score, you lose scholarships. You might not be able to enter college to begin with. Did they prepare you for the ACT, considering how critical it is for higher education?
They never prepared me for it. They just set it in front of me and told me to take it. Give it my best shot, was what they said.
Did you receive a calculator for the math portion?
No, I did not. I didn't even receive my grade or score afterwards.
So the cottages at Dogwood, the kind of house you lived at on this campus, were they clean?
I gotta say, I didn't really have any issues with the cleanliness of the rooms or anything like that. Had a place to lay your head at. Wasn't really much of a big impact.
How many restraints did you get into at Dogwood? You were there for a year, correct?
Yes. I maybe got in a total of 2 while I was at Dogwood. I think my restraint risk went higher whenever I was located in the higher programs with the angrier kids. Pretty much Dogwood was basically just me and therapy. I didn't really have much of an issue in Dogwood. Just hated being there. Waking up at the same place every day. The thing I hated about Dogwood, and obviously they're not going to tell you, is So it's sectioned by cottages, right? The boys' cottages are at the end, the girls' cottages are at the beginning. Well, say your lunchtime is at 11. You have to walk all the way down to the cafeteria from your cottage to the end of the street to get to the cafeteria. But say it's raining or it's likely impossible, but it happens, or it's snowing. You still gotta walk it. Like the sprinters, they were only for off campus purposes. But say it's raining, like raining, they make you wear a rain shower coat. Those precaution slides, they'd make you walk in those in the rain.
Tell me a bit about the precaution slides. What are they? Why would you wear them?
Precaution means elopement risk, which is runaway, or self-harm behaviors, or say you got a restraint. Then they put you on precaution for 24 hours to monitor you. You'd have to wear your slides, obviously. Precaution slides are these white slides that got black straps. They're very uncomfortable. Yeah.
So
Bob Barker.
Oh yeah, Bob Barker. Bob Barker slides. That is exactly what they use in prison. So what you're telling me, you get a restraint, you gotta wear the slides, and then you have to walk, possibly in the rain, from basically a mile in these really uncomfortable shoes while it's raining, and they're open-toed.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember that. I was never put in the precaution slides, but I remember walking in the rain at Bartlett.
Sprinters were only used for off-campus events, or what did they call it?
Good behavior outing?
Yeah, outing. Yeah. For outings.
Was there a specific instance where you saw anyone get hit, kicked, pinched, punched, anything like that?
Yes, as far as like observing, there was a lot of things I seen. But if a staff member actually hit me and I went to report that they hit me, another staff member will back them up and say, no, they didn't. And that's where it kind of falls into play of lack of communication, because I just told you that a staff hit me and you're going to go back and say, no, they didn't. That wasn't helping me. Rather, the staff was going to be truthful or lie about it. Like always, it doesn't matter. What matters is if it happened, it happened. But speak up about it. And that's what adults don't do. If the staff likes you or not, the staff will treat you accordingly. Like, you really don't have a say-so in youth villages. There to do what you gotta do, live there, have a place to sleep, roof over your head, mystery meat to eat. Yeah.
So, at Dogwood, there are cameras. There's cameras everywhere, right?
Yes.
There's cameras in the bedrooms.
Yes.
Was there ever a point where somebody or you said, hey, check the cameras, you can see this bad thing happening, and the staff just refused or said they couldn't? Or what role did the cameras play?
Honestly, the cameras are really just there. From my understanding, they never worked.
You were told that they didn't work and that's why they couldn't check the cameras for, abuse or anything like that?
Yes. There's not a rewind button. So it's basically what's there in the moment that you're looking at the camera.
And that's what you were told?
Yes.
Did you feel safe at Dogwood?
I guess it just had to depend on the day, whether you feel safe or not. Because each day was different, everybody behaved different things were popping off.
Did that ever put you on edge or make you feel like you were walking on eggshells?
Yes. It just kind of makes you feel like you're in a box or in a shell and there's no way out. But you hear everybody around you say there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I think a lot of the reasons why people have any blockage that they're carrying with them or around them is because of what may have just happened, what have already happened, or what could possibly happen.
So from Dogwood, you stepped down or went to a less restrictive placement. That placement, Wallace Group Home in Nashville, was where we met. I want to get your perspective on things. What was Wallace like for you?
The staffing there is very terrible. Say something popped off and a staff went to another staff. They both told each other, then they just went on about their day. They didn't solve the situation. They just kept talking about it, and the situation escalated more, and then everybody got pissed off. Staffing at Wallace still stuck because it was, that's my best friend, this is my best friend. We're best friends outside of here too. And I feel like, okay, you're a staff, you're friends with the staff outside of work. That's cool. But don't bring your home business in to kids that can't get out. You're basically just throwing in their face that you got freedom and they don't. And I think that's where a lot of altercations came in with staff and youth, is the whole freedom situation.
So illustrate how restrictive it is to live in a group home.
When you go to school, you got to get all your teachers to sign the paper or write the comments saying that you ain't did no schoolwork or this and that.
Like with Wallace, obviously you're going to public school instead of private school. That's one of the advantages of being in a group home. With those papers, it was like a check-in sheet, and every time you would go to class, you'd have to get your your teacher to sign the paper. And if they had a complaint about you, it would get put on the paper. And you needed to bring the paper back, because if you didn't bring the paper back, you would lose all your privileges. You wouldn't be able to go on the computer. You wouldn't be able to go, call your folks as long. Like, they literally reduce your phone call if you don't get this paper signed. So it's very important.
Right.
And sometimes you can have issues where, like, there'll be a substitute teacher and they don't know what the paper means, and so they won't sign it, right? Because they don't understand what you're asking for. You can have issues where you just forget, and then suddenly you get in trouble because you forgot. And it's really just demeaning to have to take a slip of paper up to your teacher every single day and have them sign it to make sure that you don't skip class. And then, of course, they have the staff come in anyway and check on you. I remember specifically that one staff walked in the middle of my class. It was awful. It was terrible.
And then they yell your name out loud in front of everybody.
It's so embarrassing. And it's already so hard when you live in a group home and you're a foster kid to fit in with everyone else who around you, because your life is so restricted and limited. And then they do that.
And they don't understand.
I think the best way to describe what it's like to live at Wallace is you got to ask to go to the bathroom. You got to ask to leave the room. 7 to 10 minute shower. Fucking 10-minute phone calls to your friends. No longer. Cameras everywhere. It's awful.
Monitored shaving.
You just reminded me of that. Imagine going home and somebody asks you what you do for a living, and you say you watch foster children shave. Monitored shaving.
You still get cameras in your rooms. When you fall asleep, the door still gotta be open, just like in any facility. No thanks. Then you got limited pillows, and then the blankets were just terrible. And then you could only have 2 stuffed animals, a certain personal blanket, all your clothes had to be approved. You had to have your initials on the back of everything.
Yeah, the schedule is set for you instead of you determining what you want to do. And I feel like that's just detrimental and unnecessary.
Okay, this is how I see it. The schedule that was made for everybody. But if you think about it, Youth Villages is supposed to prepare us for aging out and stuff, like for people who aged out like me and you did. But when you're placed in foster care, everybody's scheduled the same. You have no say in it. And that's not beneficial for us. We're considered a group, but we're all there for individual treatment. And I don't think that individual treatment is in place for the individual. It's in place for everybody. And that's not helpful because don't everybody need the same help?
And at the end of the day, it doesn't really prepare you to be an adult. Like on the weekends, everything is structured. This is the time you clean. This is the time where we watch TV. And this is the time where you use the computer. And then we clean the van. And then we have lunch. And it's like, well, if you're dictating every little thing down to like, this is the time where you get to write in your journal. And this is the time where you clean. And everything is so structured. You get out into the real world. And how are you supposed to know how to schedule your own day? Because you've never done it before. It's just so unnecessary.
Yes.
So from Wallace, you went to the Rose Center. Here is how Youth Villages describes the Rose Center. Rose Center for Girls is one of only a few facilities nationwide that specializes in providing therapy and supervision for girls with higher acuity needs who have a history of trauma. Our facility and child-to-staff ratio of 3:1 allows Youth Villages to provide intensive treatment while maintaining a level of safety that creates an environment of trust. In this environment, girls receive intensive therapy while also readjusting to routine, education, and life in a community setting. So, something I think that's really interesting about this, I've never been to Rose Center, but Rose Center is on the same campus as Bartlett where I was, so I did see it. I did see the outside. I was familiar with it.
Right.
In this environment, in a community setting, they use the word community setting. Were you ever in the community in Rose Center?
So the community was the courtyard. So there was 4 courtyards, and they called it a community per courtyard. Each courtyard had like their own outside area, their own fenced-in area, like stuff like that.
The community setting they're referring to is not an outside community, it's the internal community. You're locked up.
Yes. Yes.
So how did Rose Center handle COVID-19?
As far as like quarantine, we was quarantined, but as far as like getting the help we needed while being sick, no.
Yeah, you were all quarantined in the gym, correct? So it was just one giant open area.
A gym or the classroom.
So how many times did you get COVID-19 while at Rose Center?
3.
How long were you at Rose Center?
At least 8 months, I think.
8?
Yeah.
That's a lot for 8 months. So you got COVID, right? They would test you. What would happen the moment after your test got positive?
The staff would come in and pull you out and take you to where you were being quarantined at. So it was either in the classroom or the gym.
How did you receive mental health services while you had COVID?
Basically, once you were quarantined, you was quarantined. There wasn't no therapy, none of that. So whatever staff was there to monitor you, that staff had to stay there with you the whole day. Because then they were contagious too.
So they had a staff in the room with you, and they were like 6 feet away, but definitely in the room with you.
Yes.
How many other people were in the gym?
When I was in the gym, I had another youth with me. But when I was in the classroom, there was like maybe 3 to 1 classroom. So it was 3 with 1 staff.
How often did other people get COVID? Like, were you some sort of outlier when you got it 3 times? Was it really common to get it 3 times? Did you hear of anyone who got it more than 3 times?
I know there was a peer that had it 5 times.
The vaccine did come out while you were in Rose Center, right?
Yes.
Were you offered the vaccine at all?
Yes. I had to get the vaccine before I aged out.
Was there anything that Youth Villages did right?
I guess overall, just being there was the only beneficial thing. You're supposed to have a staff help you succeed. Well, the staff's only there to be there. They're not really there to help you. And that's where I feel like they were just an audience to be there, but not be there for what we need them to be there for.
If you would like to reach out, please send an email to xfostervoice@gmail.com. If you'd like a question to be answered on the show, or just want to voice your opinion, send a short video attached to your email. How do you think your bisexuality affected you in foster care?
How I put it, and this is just as a foster kid, being stuck with females, you're just stuck with females. But there's not supposed to be dating or any sexual orientation even supposed to be presented. And that's where I feel like the whole LGBTQ was totally like disrespected because, okay, we had a bunch of sex ed talks as far as like in group therapy and whatnot. And well, when it comes down to like you explaining your sexual orientation and say another peer laughs at you, it's gonna affect you, but at the same time, you gotta think about your reactions. And I don't think a lot of staff understand that when you're trapped with the same gender as you and you're doing a sexual ed class, it's not going to be appropriate at all because it's a sexual ed class. I know a lot of females had problems with like sexual intercourse being talked about. So like when like a trigger came up in any group session and like you were crying and you got pulled out, you still had to go back. Why pull me out when you know something's affecting me just to put me back into it? Like that doesn't really solve what's going on. It just makes me more dysregulated, and that doesn't help you mentally. Like they say you're supposed to overcome your trauma fears and what you've been through, but if you understand that something's bothering me, then why make the situation worse?
How did the staff treat LGBTQ people in Inner Harbour?
There was a lot of disrespect, and there was also a lot of political judgments based on the LGBTQ community. And although there was a lot of staff that was in the LGBTQ community, they were still judgmental and, well, that's not supported here, or don't come around me because you're this or you're that.
So, did you ever have a situation where youth were also doing that and saying things,
Yes.
but you couldn't go to the staff and get them to do something about it because they were also discriminatory?
Yep.
What I'm getting at here is you have staff that are saying things that are homophobic, but they're also allowed to put you in a restraint.
That is true, but at the same time, that's not the way it should be.
Do you ever think the homophobic dispositions of staff affected the way that restraints were done on certain staff? I mean, on certain youth.
Yes, I do. If the staff didn't like you, the staff was gonna, I guess, go harder with the restraint.
So it's more than that, then. It's if you get in a restraint with a staff that likes you, it's more likely to be a better
Okay,
restraint.
Yes.
Yeah. That's interesting and awful. Do you think there's something specific that youth villages can do to improve what the queer community experiences in residentials and group homes?
I feel like a lot of the staff were very bashful towards the women who were still trying to figure out who they were. If you not accept the LGBTQ community, that shouldn't have nothing to do with me. But don't disrespect me because you don't like it. And that's what a lot of staff don't understand is although a lot of staff were also involved with the LGBTQ community and everybody supported equality and stuff like that, like youth villages was never equal or supported in any type of way that was necessary. It just came with the frustration of there was certain staff that would pick on you, but nobody would ever notice.
A lot of foster teens are LGBTQ, like a lot.
Yes.
Did you ever feel closer to people because you sort of had the same common ground?
Of course. I feel like a lot of the LGBTQ in the system is controlled, but outside of the system, it's not controlled. But at the same time, it still is legally. Being queer in the system and being queer outside of the system, of course, there's a big dramatic change because there's only so much you could do in the system as who you are. But on the outside, you are who you are. That's your choice.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and being here for me. I think that it's really important and that people need to hear this and understand what it's like to actually live in a group home or live in a residential. And your experience is so diverse because you've been to multiple different facilities.
Right?
Hey y'all. Before you go, I just want to let you know that I reached out to Youth Villages and provided Adrienna's allegations. They decided to reuse the statement they gave me for Delaney, which I'll read for you now. The safety and well-being of the young people we help is always our most important concern. Our staff are trained in the Crisis Prevention Institute's model techniques and safety training, which emphasizes prevention, intervention, and non-physical methods of managing unsafe behavior. The model calls for using a therapeutic hold as a last resort to resolve an unsafe situation. There are guidelines and standards for the oversight of therapeutic holds that involve supervision and reporting. We also have video monitoring for the safety of young people and our staff. Therapeutic holds are reviewed to ensure procedures are followed. If there are concerns, those situations are escalated and handled swiftly and immediately. We strive to give every young person who comes to us their best opportunity for success. They also gave me a statement about their educational resources. Youth Villages schools are approved by the State Department of Education and have certified paraprofessionals and teachers on staff. Educational assessments are completed to determine what core content curriculum is needed for each student. Required credits for a high school diploma are available, and graduation is possible within our educational setting.